Thungela Resources released their annual results today, and while the coal business is booming, it seems the coal miner is still being derailed by Transnet's troubles. The group was able to declare an impressive dividend of 40 Rand a share for shareholders, but Transnet's poor infrastructure had a direct impact on export volumes. I'm joined now by CEO Ndlovu. Mr. Ndlovu, thank you so much for joining us. You know, business is booming for the coal industry. How frustrating has it been that you haven't been able to fully capitalize on your export market due to the problems that Transnet has had with their railway infrastructure?
Good evening, Sally. Firstly, we're quite pleased with the results that we have delivered and the contribution that we've been able to make all around to society, to our employees, to our communities, and to our shareholders. Clearly, we would have wanted to do more. And you're right, as you preface your question by saying Transnet has been our biggest challenge. But I prefer to look with optimism to today and the future. We are beginning to work together with Transnet to find solutions to what is a very difficult situation. But again, you know, South Africa needs to pull its sleeves and work together to resolve this critical issue if we've got to realize the full potential of the mining contribution in this country.
Talk to me about the conversations you're having with Transnet and what sort of workarounds you're deciding on, and timeframes as well, because of course time is money.
Sally, the way to think about the work we're doing in Transnet is to think about it in two ways. The first one is, in particular, in our North Corridor, which is the work that I'm leading with Mpho Lehlape. You got to think about getting the best of the current infrastructure and rails rolling stock that we've got. They declared that they've got 60 million tons. This year past, we did 50 million tons. The work we're doing is to understand what are the critical core issues that are preventing us from doing that so that we can actually prioritize the actions. And those actions include things like improving our tactics around security, beginning to work on infrastructure to get the reliability up, beginning to work on procurement, on spares, so that we can begin the equipment, we can get the equipment to perform at the level that we expect. In the future, beyond the what we've got, is to deal with the critical issue of the long-standing locals as a result of the dispute with the Chinese. And we're quite pleased with and encouraged by the bold step Transnet has taken to go out in the market and look at alternative original equipment manufacturers who can come and fix these locals so that they can come back online and make a significant contribution to South Africa. So we think in the short term, maybe a year and a half, we should be able to get the 60 million tons that Transnet is committed to. But over the next 18 to 24 months, we should be working on bringing the additional locals back online so that we can get back to the levels that we achieved in 2020.
So that sounds potentially very hopeful. Within 18 to 24 months, those locomotives back on the tracks. As you say, there's also the issue of security that's being dealt with, and hopefully then your export volumes can increase. Does that mean that 2023 is still going to be quite a difficult year? I would imagine you're having to use trucks to move your coal as well. That must have an impact.
Sally, from very early on, we said there's a good reason why the world over bulk commodities such as coal are moved over long distances by rail. It is simply the most effective, the most cost-effective, most efficient way to do it. Yes, whilst we can use trucking in the short term, we don't think that is sustainable from an ESG point of view. And at current prices, as prices have been softening, we think actually it's becoming less and less competitive. So yes, that's an alternative, but we don't think that is a sustainable alternative. That leaves us with one option, which is working very hard with our partners in Transnet, which is what we're doing, to get the infrastructure delivering to its full potential.
Talk to me about the future of coal. We know that the planet has to move away from dependence on oil and coal because essentially the emissions they pump into the atmosphere are damaging our planet and also having a direct impact on people's health. Yet we also see how crucially important coal is during our energy crisis, for example. How does a company like Thungela Resources manage that changing environment? Because I suppose you don't want to be caught napping saying, oh, it's all going to be fine forever. Things are going to change one way or another. Talk to me about your future scenario planning.
So, like everybody else, quite often when I talk about the future of coal and I say coal will remain part of the energy mix, people think I'm a climate change analyst. On the contrary, we're not, and I'm not. And in that regard, you'd have noticed that we said we would review our emissions over the last year, and this morning we announced that we'll be reducing our Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions by 30% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. How do we think about the future of coal given the point you've made? The critical issue is to accept that, in fact, coal is going to be part of the energy mix. And therefore, we need to chart a pathway that recognizes that. We also need to recognize that developing economies, which are the markets that we serve, are going to be on the back part of that transition away from fossil fuels and coal in particular. And if that is the case, we see a coexistence of the energy mixes that include coal as we transition to a future. In fact, I would go as far as saying the transition will be powered through coal going forward.
Just talk to me about what you said about net zero by 2030. Break that down for me so that someone, a layman such as myself, can understand practically what that means for a coal company.
Practically what that means when we talk about Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions is we're going to reduce the amount of emissions from our own operations in the first instance. Secondly, what we're going to do is we're going to be deploying on 2 of our mines solar energy to ensure that we power rather than with fossil fuel, we'll power with renewables. Thirdly, up to 2030, there are 2 mines which, when they close, will not be replacing them, so that again will reduce our footprint.
That sounds really interesting, and it's so interesting to hear that a coal company as well is saying this is the future, but we still have a role to play in getting there. Thank you so much for chatting to us today. That, of course, was the CEO of Thungela Resources, Ndlovu.